When you plug your bass into your bass rig, do you ever get that feeling that your signal is either too hot and it's clipping, or it's too weak and you're not getting enough signal through? A lot of players try to fix this by dropping in a volume block at the beginning of their signal chain or a volume pedal on their pedal boards. And you'll see a lot of Line 6 Helix presets coming out with a volume block as the first block in the signal path. So it seems reasonable that that's best practice, right? Today we're going to go through why I prefer using a compressor over a volume block, as it gives you the gain control you were looking for, but also added advantage over tone control and tightening up your playing. Let's check that out. For us bassists, the problem we face when connecting our bass into our rig is consistency of volume. Your signal's either too hot and it's blowing up the amp model and clipping, or it's too low and you're not moving the meters enough, and if you're trying to record, you're not getting enough volume. For me, this is frustrating because I'm looking for consistency gig to gig, even with different basses. I need a signal that's just right before it hits all the effects in the amp models, to give those effects and amp models the best signal that they can get to get the best outcome of my tone. And like most of us, I don't want to waste rehearsal time or the short period I get to do sound check at the live gig to be playing around with my volumes. When you plug a microphone into a mixing desk, the first thing the engineer is going to do is adjust the gain control for that channel. They're going to ensure that the signal going into the desk is like Goldilocks' porridge. Not too loud, not too soft, it's just right. Same thing if you go straight from your bass into the desk or from the DI into the desk. They're going to be looking for the same thing. Is the gain on the channel at sufficient level to get a clean signal with some headroom? The question is, what's the best way to do this inside your amp modeler where there is no input gain control? So how do we adjust the input gain on our bass rig? Well, on a solid state amp like my MarkBass, there's a gain and a clip signal. So I up the gain control until it starts to clip and I roll back a bit, and that's the optimal input signal for that amp. On a valve amp like an SVT, there is a drive control. You turn the drive up until you get to the level of drive that you want, and that's the optimal signal for the input for that amp. On a pedal board, often the first pedal in your pedal board will have a input gain control. Guitarists like to put volume pedals at the beginning of their pedal boards. They do things like swells and other stuff and try to look cool. But that's one way of adjusting that. If you change guitars, you can adjust the pedal and the gain changes. But what about when you're using an amp modeler like the Line 6 Helix? Well, the simple and probably most obvious solution is to drop a volume block at the very beginning of the chain, because the Helix doesn't have input controls on the input. Now, the idea of putting a volume block at the beginning of the signal path seems intuitive, right? It comes with most of the presets, so it seems to be the thing that everybody does. Based on a mixing desk analogy from before, it feels right to have a master fader at the beginning of the signal path, so you can get a good, healthy signal down the line to achieve good gain staging. And as I change basses, if one's got hotter pickups than the other one, then I can adjust the volume of that input to adjust between instruments. The volume block will allow you to trim or boost the bass signal before it hits the rest of your effects, which is what we're looking for, consistent signal on the input. So just like the gain trim on the mixing desk, you can get your levels right. So for example, if you switch from a passive jazz bass to an active 5-string bass, the volume block then evens those out as you change. On the Helix, you can use a snapshot to set the volume level based on the bass that you're using. So snapshot 1 might be for the jazz bass and the volume might be up a little bit. Snapshot 2 might be for your active 5-string dingwell. I could do with one of those if anyone's throwing one out. And that might have the gain slightly lower. The advantage of this is it's simple, it's clean, And there's no tonal change to the signal. You're just boosting the gain or trimming the gain. Now, while this concept is right and has those advantages, you're basically wasting a block that could be used by something much smarter. The limitations you have with this is it only changes the level. It doesn't change or manage the dynamics of your playing, the soft notes versus the louder notes, and it doesn't give you control over the consistency of your playing. So if a volume block's not the right thing to use, what's the alternative? This is where a compressor like the Rochester Comp on the Helix, or an MXR M80 on your pedal board, or one of 1,000 other compressor pedals on the market will be a much better option for you. Rather than thinking of the compressor like a squishy, funky effect, start thinking of it as a utility tool. It's an intelligent gatekeeper over your entire signal chain. Unlike a volume block that just mindlessly increases the volume or decreases the volume based on your settings, the compressor dynamically turns down only the parts of the signal that are too loud and turns up the parts of the signal that are too low. So not only can you set it at a gain level, but it also then evens out your signal before it gets to your amp. Instead of just turning the whole signal up or down, the compressor controls the peaks. So hard notes don't clip your amp. It lifts the quieter notes so they don't disappear, especially if you're going from an aggressive slap into a slight passing note and then back into slap. It'll try and keep that volume normalized. And the compressor will also add sustain and punch that makes your tone feel more alive. In other words, it still solves the input gain challenge that we started with, but it gives you a musical tool that makes your bass feel bigger, more controlled, and evens out your signal before it gets to the amp. So not only do you provide the optimal volume level for your signal path as it goes to the next lot of pedals and amp in sequence, you're also normalizing what's being sent to it. So there's nothing popping out or being hidden. The result is a rock solid, consistent signal that feeds the rest of your chain. The input volume is set and your playing is consistent. So here's the big takeaway. Volume block is like hiring someone to just open the door for you. Whereas a compressor is like hiring a sound engineer who not only opens the door, but sets the lighting, balances the room, and makes you look great. When I switched over to using the Rochester Comp at the start of my signal chain, my signal stopped being unpredictable. Every bass, every venue, it's consistent. And instead of fighting my tone, I just play. I get the channel gain that I need regardless of the instrument that I'm using. I can set a preset with Snapshot 1 for a highly active or loud output bass, and then I can set preset 2, which drops the input gain on the compressor to adjust with a quieter, more passive bass. I get my dynamics under control, so my aggressive playing and my quieter notes all come through consistently. And I get a professional polish to the overall sound that a volume control is just not going to give me. My bass sustains a lot more, and that's great for me when I'm doing harmonics or tapping or anything that's a bit varied in my playing. If you want some insights on how to use the Rochester or another similar compressor pedal at the beginning of your signal chain, check out this video where I go through how to do that. So are you team volume block or, like me, team compressor? If you're just looking to do a bit of volume roll off or increase and you've got enough blocks on your modeler to spare, then volume's great. But if you want control, consistency, and tone shaping without sacrificing a block, then a compressor is the smarter choice. So the next time you're building a patch, drop in the Rochester Comp first or your favorite compressor. That just happens to be mine. Set your threshold and ratio so the signal is nice and even, and then build the rest of your rig on top of that. If you're using a preset from Line 6's library, try swapping out the volume block at the beginning with the compressor. As a quick start, aim for a 4:1 compression ratio, set your attack at around 20 milliseconds, And bring the threshold down so you're getting around about 3 to 6 decibels in reduction over your largest hits or loudest hits. You'll instantly feel the difference, not only in your playing, but in the output that's coming through. If you follow the link below to the website, you'll find a number of free guides on how to set your tone, and one specifically on how to set the Rochester comp at the beginning of your signal path. So check that out. And if you haven't seen it yet, check this video out where I go through more around compression. Catch ya.